Okay, greetings programs. Dave here. I've kind of debated whether or not to do a political um, post-mortem, I guess you could say, for the Democrats. But it's been a whole week now, and from everything I've been seeing in the news and on social media, the Democrats seem determined not to learn a damn thing. So here we are. Uh, for those of you who don't already know me, I'm not in any way a political pundit. I don't get paid for my opinion. I don't get any information from any political party, super PAC, think tank, any kind of that stuff. I'm just an average dude giving you an opinion. I've not affiliated with any political organization, political party, anything like that. Um, I did vote for Jill Stein in 2016, just so you know that up front, um, if you care about that kind of thing. What I wanted to do with this, it's not going to be an exhaustive analysis of the election or the things leading up to it. The election's over. It's no use arguing for or against a candidate anymore, as if there are any votes in the balance or something like that. Um, Basically, I think the current system that we have is best served by strong oppositional parties. That includes Republicans and Democrats, but it seems like what we've got now is closer to two sides of the same coin. They make different kinds of noises when they're trying to get the votes, but in practice, in reality, what we seem to get is more of the same, or at the very best, incremental changes in one direction or another. So I kind of wanted to address that. Not trying to gloat, not trying to make anybody mad or poke any wounds. I'm not endorsing any candidates in this election, previous elections, or elections to come. Basically, in order to keep two strong oppositional parties, since we essentially have a duopoly, it's even more important that the two parties check and balance each other. So this is a wake-up call to Democrats. They need to own their mistakes. They need to admit that they made mistakes, and they need to acknowledge what the mistakes were, and then they need to learn from them, so they don't keep doing the same thing. I think core to that is going to be Democrats need to choose who their constituency is. Is it going to be people or corporations? Because right now, and for a long time, they have slanted heavily in favor of the corporations. So what went wrong? Let's go all the way back to the primaries, because things were definitely already going wrong. So I think we can go ahead and state the obvious. Pre-selecting your candidate was a terrible idea. Absolutely just plain old terrible, horrible, no good idea. Um, I guess nobody bothered to stick their finger up and check which way the political winds were blowing before you did that. It seems like it was not a consideration at all. Um, then when they did it, they apparently didn't even consider the possibility that she would not be a popular candidate. She would not be a workable candidate, and so they didn't have a plan for changing. It was, from the beginning, it was Hillary or nothing for them. And when they colluded with the mainstream media and they spun this narrative that she was inevitable. They had to know that eventually people were going to find out that they were always, from the word go, in the tank for Hillary. And when people found out about that, that's disaster waiting to happen. People don't like being fooled or tricked. And the selection of Hillary Clinton herself was an even worse idea. You knew going into it that she had historically just epic unfavorable ratings, and you went with her anyway. That just defies logic. If you had been paying any attention whatsoever, even before the primaries began, you should have realized that this election cycle was about actual, real change, not hope for change, actual change. It was a revolutionary cycle, and you ran the epitome of an establishment candidate. Worst idea ever, really. And the main thing was that Hillary's own record and her behavior contradicted the messages and themes of her campaign. She was all about progressive and playing to the base and things like that. But her warmongering and her corporate ties and all of that stuff just directly contradicted what the campaign itself was trying to spin as its message, and that just reinforced the notion or the perception that she was untrustworthy and unbelievable, and as well it should. I mean, it didn't create that perception, it just reminded people why that perception already existed. Sometimes polls do matter. I mean, I know, especially this cycle, a lot of polls were shown to be absolute rubbish, and you can argue about methodology and things like that, weighting, whether or not they skewed polls, and maybe that's why some of them were so far off. But there were plenty of polls that were unbiased and done the right way, and they showed clearly that Hillary was not the strongest general election candidate, and she just wasn't going to do well, or had the potential to do very poorly in a general election. It was also obvious even before this cycle began. I mean, you can go back historically and look at her unfavorable ratings, and they don't come up. Sometimes they go even lower, and then they come back up to where they were. But she doesn't ever really greatly improve her unfavorables, ever. That's just a thing that you get when you get Hillary. And well, I guess they thought that didn't matter. Some other things that were obvious and made the DNC look pretty stupid by ignoring them were the enthusiasm gap. Here they had a candidate in Bernie who was bringing out massive crowds. He was creating a lot of enthusiasm. He was getting newer people into the party and into the process, and he was exciting a large swath of voters, people who were going to be engaged, people who were going to actually come out and pull the lever, and you didn't care about that, apparently. And there's also the credibility gap. Bernie's actually progressive record, going back decades, from his time as a protester for civil rights all the way up to the war in Iraq, you name it. You can go back for every stupid thing that our government has done over the last 40 years. There's a picture or a video of Bernie there trying to talk them out of it. Bernie saying, no, don't do this, this is stupid, and then the establishment doing that stupid thing anyway. That, as opposed to Hillary's, there's no other way to describe it, transparent pandering. She would go to one little constituency and aim a message at them, and go to the next one and twist it a little bit to aim it directly at them. There was no overarching message. She was just going to little pieces of the electorate and trying to appeal to them specifically, which is what you do when you don't have a comprehensive vision. We get to the financing. Bernie obviously proved that you can finance a campaign without holding out your hat to corporate donors and wealthy donors and the establishment's textbook for fundraising. He proved that it can be done because he did it, and he did it rather well. Hillary, on the other hand, was doing the closed door, keep out the press, blast white noise so they can't hear what you're saying fundraisers, and it could not have been a more stark contrast in how they were financing their campaigns. And in a cycle like this election was, Hillary's method for fundraising turned out to be not that great an idea. People were not drawn to her candidacy in large part because of her doing things like that. And that includes the Wall Street transcripts that she hemmed and hawed and made excuses and never did release. We got to see a little bit of a couple of them thanks to WikiLeaks, but if it was up to Hillary, we still wouldn't have any idea what she'd said. And nothing in them would have been nearly as bad as the way it looked when she hit them, when she refused to release them, when she kept pushing it back and making bizarre conditions for releasing them to the public. It was another example of Hillary and her team's attitude and methodology not actually caring at all about people. They wanted to keep their donors happy. People came second at best, and that wasn't a winning strategy, obviously. Oh, the convention. That was a mess. And if you think it wasn't, you weren't paying attention. You were only watching CNN or something like that, because it was a mess. As contentious and orchestrated in Hillary's favor as some of the state conventions were, they were basically just warm-ups for the strictly choreographed monstrosity that was the national convention. People were still, all the way up to that point, were trying to warn the DNC about impending doom if they nominated Hillary. I mean, we could see it coming. Some of us could see it coming. We knew that a Trump presidency was in the cards if they insisted on nominating Hillary. And for that, we were called ridiculous and bitter and all sorts of other condescending names. And that wasn't cool. It cost a lot of votes when you did that. And it turns out we were right. So take from that what you will. Some things I can't believe you actually did was, of course, nominate Hillary. That was your last chance to come to your senses and actually put forward a candidate that could have easily beat Trump. The white noise generators, again, in the auditorium, to hold down the roar from those sections where there were people, Bernie supporters for the most part, protesting. Um, that's that's not how you bring people back into the fold. Um, Same for shutting off the lights in the seat sections where people were holding up signs that were not pro-Hillary. That was petty. That was blatant. Um, you didn't turn the lights off. You turned the people that were sitting under those lights off. You you lost them when you did that, and you didn't have to be done. It was stupid. Um, they even confiscated signs that were not pro-Hillary. Uh, really, that's your answer to people who are taking part in this process. That's your answer to people who are expressing an opinion and actually engaging with the process, is to take away their signs, shut off the lights, drown them out with white noise, and say, okay, now get in line. Um, you shouldn't have been surprised when that didn't happen. I even heard they employed seat fillers in an attempt to create the illusion of unity after a lot of Sanders supporters walked out of the auditorium. They brought in replacement butts to fill the seats, and that was ridiculous. It may have looked good on television to not have all those empty seats, but all you were doing was hiding a problem, a major, glaring problem with the candidacy of Hillary. And you didn't do yourself any favors. You ignored a problem, and it ended up biting you on the butt, which should have been no surprise. A couple of things I can't believe you didn't do was, first and foremost, forbid Debbie Wasserman Schultz from even appearing at the convention. She was already out of the picture, or should have been, when she was forced to resign from the DNC, and that should have been the end of that. She should have just gone away and took a cruise or something and stayed out of the picture until after the election. But no, Hillary immediately hires her for her own campaign, which just another thumb in the eye of all the people who were affected by the machinations of Schultz and the DNC, and it cost you a lot of votes. You also could have adopted the progressive platform that Dr. Cornel West especially played a part in proposing. They tried. They tried to get some really progressive things on there about fracking and campaign finance, and of course the establishment threw a couple of bones. They included, I think, the $15 minimum wage, which was happening anyway. That didn't cost them anything. Putting $15 an hour minimum wage in the platform was basically just acknowledging something that was already happening. It was a bone that wasn't even a bone. It was just a placebo. But anyway, so yeah, you missed another opportunity there. And now we come to the general election, which at that point you were hosed. Anybody who was paying any attention at all, in an objective or real sense, knew that you were just circling the drain at that point. And either on some level you knew that, you had to have an inkling at the least, or you're all insane, and that's all there is to it. I mean, even people like me who aren't plugged into politics 24/7 all year, every year, could see what was happening. And if you didn't, you should go find something else to do. Seriously. Might as well at least mention WikiLeaks. I think it played a significant part in what happened, but it wasn't the deal breaker. I mean, I would, even before the leaks started coming out, I already knew who Hillary was, what she stood for, what she was likely to stand for if she got elected, and that's why I didn't support her. WikiLeaks confirmed some things. WikiLeaks maybe exposed some things that we hadn't even known were going on. But it didn't, for me at least, it wasn't the deal breaker. The deal had already been broken for me at that point. But ignoring the documents, ignoring the leaks, that was kind of stupid. That was, I don't know who thought that was a good strategy, but they should be run out of town on rails. That was ridiculous. Blaming the documents on Russia, as if that made, no matter who actually got the documents, whether it was an inside leak or an outside hack or whatever, that was a separate discussion. To try to turn the content of the leaked documents into an excoriation of whoever got the documents to begin with was stupid. I mean, they should have been two different conversations, not, well, we can't look at the leaks because they came from whoever. That was never going to work, and it only made you look even more like you were hiding things and operating with impunity, and it hurt you more than anything. So whoever thought that one up should be on their way out of DC right now as well. Failing to acknowledge and actually take action on the reality of the leaks that wasn't even stupid. That was beyond stupid. As I mentioned, hiring Wasserman Schultz after she was forced to resign from the DNC, that was epically stupid. That was just, I shouldn't even have to go into detail there. I mean, that's a shit idea because it's really obviously a shit idea. Also, refusing to respond in any way when Brazil's cheating was exposed, when she was caught in WikiLeaks handing over questions to the Clinton campaign before these town halls and debates or whatever they were. To not even address that, to just say, oh, no, Russia, don't look at them, there's viruses, and not address it in any way, and not, excuse me, immediately remove her from her position in the DNC, to let her go ahead and stay there. That was just, I don't know who thought that could ever be a good idea. That was just beyond anything that I would have thought possible for even a politician to think was doable in a political context. The collusion, the running stories by the Clinton campaign before they got published, the planting of stories with friendly journalists, things like that, pretending none of that went on, just never addressing it in any way, shape, or form. You did yourself no favors, because people knew it happened. They could read it for themselves. They knew it was going on. And for you to just ignore it completely reinforced the idea that for Hillary and her crew, the laws and the rules were for other people, and that cost you votes. Yeah, I'm not going to go through the leaks like individually or any of the specific revelations really. Um, if you haven't read them yet, you obviously don't care about them, and if you have read them, you already know what I would be saying anyway. But one thing you better grok is that people are reading the leaks. People have read them. People are going to keep reading them. They're going to understand what happened and who was involved, and they're going to remember it. This is not something that a one and done. It only applied to this campaign. People are going to remember the things that went on in this cycle, and if you continue to ignore all of these things that went on, or even worse, if you try to repeat the same mistakes again, um, you can pretty much count on facing some pretty stiff resistance. People are awake now. You can't put them back to sleep. Not all of them. Some of them maybe you can, but nowhere near all of them. And the whole thing basically just it proved to reinforce and legitimize the perception that your candidate and her cronies operate as if the rules only apply to other people. No, that's very important, because it is what I think ultimately cost you the most in the way of votes. Um, it, People just did not see Hillary as somebody who could be counted on, somebody who could be trusted, somebody who would do the right thing, even if it wasn't in her own specific selfish interest. Because everything we were seeing, everything we were reading, everything we were hearing pointed to Hillary acting only in the interests of herself, her donors, and her cronies. And people said, no thank you. Uh, don't know who was in charge of this part of the campaign strategy, or whether it was a group decision. Um, but whoever decided to run a campaign based on anti-Trumpism, um, yeah, you helped her lose. There's no way around that. Um, a a flawed opponent, even an opponent as flawed as Trump, and there are no lack of flaws there, doesn't equal having a good candidate yourself. It just doesn't. You reduced your campaign to, well, she may not be perfect, but at least she's not Trump. And that may be true, but it's not enough. Now, also thanks to some leaks and some video that came out, hot mic moments and stuff like that, and things that Trump himself tweeted. He made a pretty decent case against himself, but the Democrats also did a fair job of presenting a case against Trump, or for not voting for Trump. But that's not reasons to vote for Hillary. It's having reasons to not vote for someone isn't the same thing as reasons to vote for your candidate. They're just not. It was not. It was never going to get you to where you needed to be, giving all of Hillary's own baggage. If she had been a popular candidate, if she had been a candidate who didn't have scandals and skeletons in her closet from decades in Washington, maybe that could have worked. You could have run at least our candidate isn't Trump campaign. But with Hillary, that was a huge risk, and obviously was a failure. When you fearmonger like that, people do not like being manipulated. I don't know why they political pundits and strategists always seem to forget that. People don't like being manipulated. It will come back and bite you on the ass. It will have the opposite effect if they realize it's happening, and they often do. At least some people will always realize that that's what you're doing, and you'll lose them immediately. And if it becomes clear to more people that that's what happened, you end up losing them, or at least a large portion of them as well. And that's exactly what happened. Every time you came out and attacked Trump, it really, it also hurt your own candidate a little bit, because she was guilty of a lot of stuff herself. She was guilty of backing and promoting and voting for a lot of really horrible legislation and policies. And when you came and tried to scaremonger Trump, people would look back and say, well, didn't Hillary do this? Didn't she vote for that? And it looked like hypocrisy. Not a good thing. And then there were the videos and photographs showing Hillary and Bill golfing with Trump, or at I think it was one of the Trump family's weddings. Maybe it was one of Trump's weddings, I don't know. But if there was no lack of that kind of thing out there, showing the Clintons and the Trumps socializing happily, jovially, apparently completely at ease with each other's families. I mean, they were friends, basically, as much as, I guess, politicians do the friendship thing. And so every time you called him and his supporters deplorable, and yet we can see the evidence that you hung out with him, you went to his wedding, you golfed with him, and if he's deplorable, what does that make you? You're the one hanging around with him. You're the one who's been friends for decades. So it didn't seem genuine when you called him deplorable, or his supporters deplorable, because that you had been a friend of his for all that time. It was just bizarre and had no effect, or even made you look worse. Pretty stupid. Basically, no amount of tearing down your opponent, no amount of smears or pointing out flaws in your opponent makes a case for your candidate. All that does is give people reasons not to vote for your opponent. It does absolutely nothing for convincing people to vote for your candidate. And almost your entire campaign was Trump bad, Trump horrible. Where was the reason to vote for Hillary other than she's not Trump? You didn't really have an answer for that. So basically, the way I see it, Hillary never should have been the Democrat candidate to begin with. It just shouldn't have been allowed to happen. Everybody knew that she had a chance of losing. Some of us thought she had a more than somewhat chance of losing. But you went with her anyway, even after the revelations of pre-selection and collusion. You still went with her. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Pre-selecting Hillary proved that the Democratic establishment doesn't actually care what voters think, want, or need. All it cared about was the candidate that they had already decided on, and they were sticking to that no matter what. no matter what voters wanted, no matter what the times, these times, no matter what kind of a candidate the country needs at this moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the candidate that they had already selected, and it was that or nothing. And, well, guess what you ended up with? When Bernie proved to be a stronger and a better candidate against Trump, if Hillary actually cared what voters think, want, or need, she would have stepped aside. She would have read the prevailing political winds and said, you know what, for the good of the country, for the good of the party, yeah, guess it's not my time after all. I'm the wrong candidate in the wrong election, and she would have just gotten out of the way. But no, hubris wouldn't allow her to even consider that. Oh well, when you have to cheat and lie your way to a nomination, that's a pretty big sign that you're going to have a lot of trouble in a general election. They should have seen that one coming, but who knows? I mean, I don't even pretend to understand how they think in Camp Hillary. I mean, it just, from top to bottom, none of it made any sense to me. So, oh well. But going forward, everyone in the DNC and the Hillary campaign who had anything to do with trying to coronate her, trying to twist everything else around the idea of Hillary as a candidate, need to be replaced. And as in yesterday, not next year, not 10 years from now, yesterday. They need to be out of there if the Democrats are going to have any hope of rebounding from this just colossal failure of a campaign. It's the only thing that's going to restore trust. I've got a few predictions, though. I've never been accused of being an optimist, so these will probably come as no surprise. I predict the Democrat establishment will not learn a damn thing from this election. I've been watching all the major news channels, the corporate media, CNN, BBC, MSNBC, Fox. I scan all of them, just trying to get an idea of what narratives they're spinning and what they either think is important or what somebody has told them to say is important. And from everything that I can see on that side and everything that I'm seeing in social media from Democrats and Hillary supporters, they're only sorry that they got caught. They don't actually care what happened, why it happened, I guess I should say. They're just mad that it happened. The Democrat establishment is still addicted to big money donors and corporate sponsorships and backroom deals and top-down management, and they're not learning anything. It's been an entire week, and everything that I've seen so far points to the fact that the Democrats are going to be business as usual for the foreseeable future. And oh well, I mean, they can do that. There's no law against it. I think it's a mistake, but that's what I predict they're going to do. They're going to continue to blame their loss on everyone and everything except their own mistakes, their own corruption, their own collusion, their own miscalculations, and they're going to continue to do it until the bitter end. They will never own up to their own culpability in this election. I think for one thing, it's because admitting that they made mistakes would mean that they would have to institute some reforms. They would have to change some things. They would have to get rid of some people. And they're, as far as I can see, they're unwilling to even think about that, much less actually do it. So, oh well. And to this day, they're still blaming Bernie and people who voted for Jill Stein, all 20 of us, and other non-staunch Hillary contingents for what happened, and that's just absolutely ridiculous. There are so many factors that played a much bigger role. The millions of people less that came out to vote for Hillary than voted for Obama, even just in 2012. The Democrats who couldn't stomach Clinton and either didn't vote or voted for Trump or whatever. We could go on and on and on and on and on. But they refuse to acknowledge that. They refuse to even think about correcting that. No, they just want to blame the Bernie folk and the Stein folk, and all they're doing is turning off those voters. A lot of them are young. They at least are or were politically engaged. Whether or not they remain that way, I guess we'll just have to see. I'd be pretty disgusted with the whole thing, personally. I am disgusted, and luckily I'm not a young person. I'm kind of used to that now. But I hope we don't lose too many of them, going forward. But all those people who you berated and insulted and talked so condescendingly to, I wouldn't blame them if they abandoned the Democrat Party and maybe stayed away for the rest of their lives. You may have lost them forever, and you've only yourself to blame. But I think you're going to see a much leaner Democrat Party going forward. They lost a lot of people for a lot of reasons this cycle. Whether or not they can do anything about it remains to be seen. Personally, it doesn't look like they know what to do, or they're not listening to the people who are telling them what they need to do, and maybe they don't even care. Maybe as long as they keep getting those big checks, they keep getting those celebrity endorsements, maybe that is all that matters to them. I don't know. Guess we'll just have to wait and see. So going forward, if they asked me what would I say to them, if somebody from the DNC rang me up and said, Dave, what do you think? What should we do? Well, I mean, it's obvious that the Democrats and the Republicans, in their own way, the Republicans are having a bit of a crisis themselves. It's not new to this cycle. They'd been having it, ever since the rise of the Tea Party, basically. Republicans have been having a civil war that was pretty much on simmer, sometimes bubbling up, but it had already been there before this election cycle, and it's still there. The Trump candidacy and now presidency has changed that a little, but it certainly hasn't gotten rid of it. And now the Democrats are having to face some turmoil themselves, and both parties, I think, are in the middle of trying to figure out who they are and what kind of parties they're going to be going forward from this point. Pretending that these that these problems exist, pretending that they don't exist, it isn't going to do either of the major parties any good. So they need to go ahead and acknowledge that and work from that perspective, that yeah, there's something going on. Otherwise, they're going to fail. And the Republicans, on their part, they seem pretty comfortable with moving ever further to the right. Obviously, I mean, you look at some of the things, the platform policies that Trump ran on in his campaign. Republicans got behind. They're perfectly comfortable with moving even further to the right, as if I wouldn't have guessed that was really possible, but yes, it is. They did it. And the problem, as far as I'm concerned, is that establishment Democrats, who are already embracing corporatism and militarism, what a lot of people call neoliberalism, it's basically Republicans light. They seem happy to slide further right as well, and that's one of the reasons that people rejected Clinton. Is she was a symbol, the embodiment of the neoliberal slide to the right, while making progressive noises to the left, but that's all it is. It's noise. It's a steady slide to the right. It has been for decades. Yeah, I hate to say it, but pretty much going back to Bill Clinton's presidency. So people, a lot of people, obviously don't want that. So that leaves us this big gaping hole on the left, where arguably Democrats used to be, but now there's nobody, except parties like the Greens, some independents, and so where do these people go? Are they just going to give up on politics entirely? Are they going to stop voting, stop paying attention, or somebody like the Green Party, or maybe a completely new progressive party, gonna take up that mantle, gonna pick up that baton, and actually address issues that are important to me and people who think like me, including climate change, social justice, individual rights as opposed to corporate privileges and rights. And corporate greed. I mean, these things are intertwined, and they have to be addressed as a package. It's one of the failures, I think, of both major parties, is that they try to take these issues and nitpick at them as if they're happening in a vacuum. They take an issue like climate change, and they tinker around the edges, and they argue about whether this is happening or that's happening, or what they should do about this or that, or whether we should go rapidly to 100% green, or keep doing these stupid so-called transitional fossil fuels, and they completely ignore the things like what it's doing to water, and what it's doing to the air, and what it's doing to people, and what that does to the economy. And it's all part and parcel. You can't just take one little piece out and mess with it, put it back, and expect the whole thing to be fixed. You need to address it holistically. And so far, we don't have a party that does that. If you look at the results of the election, almost half of the country didn't even vote. I mean, when you hear people on the news saying half the country is celebrating Trump and half the country is sad, well, no. Actually, about 25% of the country voted for Republicans, and about 25% voted for Democrats. The other half were, I don't know, off watching American Idol or playing Pokemon or whatever it is they do instead of paying attention and voting and things like that. Um, like 50% of the nation doesn't actually feel engaged enough to get up and pull the lever. Um, so if a party or candidate could actually excite and engage those voters, um, they could see some pretty startling, some pretty overwhelming election wins. Um, and I, for one, would love to see that because neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have shown any real interest, as far as I can tell, in tapping into that huge constituency. Um, Half the people, literally half the people in this country, are apparently just waiting for somebody that they think is worth voting for. Somebody who actually represents them, and the first ones to figure that out, uh, yeah, they're going to do well. Um, and if the Republicans and Democrats don't want to step into those shoes, don't want to take that challenge, eh, maybe we just need to find somebody who will. And that's all I've got. Thanks.